I met Neal at Town Day a year ago. He had a stand with some of his books out in front of bookends. And I stopped and talked to him and looked at his book, and he convinced me right then and there that I had to read The Garden Club Gang. So I went into Bookends and bought it. And I've been a fan ever since. I think you will all enjoy listening to him talk about his career as a high-tech vice president and how he changed into an author who has written 5 books, and they're all wonderful. One is better than the next. So please welcome Neal Sanders.
Thank you. It's easier to hold this or to put it up here. Take your pick.
Well, I'd like to do that.
Okay, fine. Right. Unfortunately, Connie misintroduced me because I'm not going to talk about being a high-tech executive. They don't want to hear that stuff. Come on. What I want to talk to you instead is about strong, independent, resourceful women. Okay? That's the topic for today. Anybody ever, watch Lifetime, made-for-TV movies, old movies on TCM, that sort of thing? I want you to imagine this scene, which you've seen any number of times, and it's what's happened is you got 2 guys in a room, and they're sitting there and they're knocking the stuffings out of one another, and it's just this horrible knockdown, drag-out fight. And standing over in the corner is a woman. And this woman is either biting her nails or knuckles, or else she's simply cowering. And she may have very well have something next to her, a weapon, maybe a fire poker or a 2x4. And she's not using it. Instead, she's just sitting going, This seems to me to be the convention that both writers, but particularly screenwriters, use when they are portraying women. Women are docile. Women are, women sit in the corner and they cower if there's a fight going on. And my problem is, these are not the women that I know, and they're certainly not the women that I grew up with. My sister, who is 6 years older than me, was in her 20s a roadie with Bob Marley and the Wailers. I don't know if that name means anything to you, but Bob Marley and the Wailers does reggae, and they went to places in the world that I would not go on a bet. And my sister Beverly went with them. Okay? I had an aunt, unfortunately deceased, who stood well under 5 feet. And she was the kind of person who, if that fight were going on in front of her, she would have taken off one of those 4-inch heels of her, and she would have stood there, she would have started wailing away with them, because that's the kind of woman she was. My mother was a town clerk, and her job was to keep politicians in their place. And believe me, that was a full-time occupation, and she did it. And my wife, sitting there in the back, she is fearless, and I will let it go with that. When I started writing mysteries, what I knew was that I wanted to write about the women that I knew, not the women that you see on television. Strong, independent, interesting women. No cowering heroines, nothing like that. The real women. Well, today I've got 5 books under my belt, and that's what I've been writing about all this time. I want to tell you a little bit about the women in them, not so much the books themselves, but the women. I may have gone overboard with the first one, Murder Imperfect. That's this one. Okay. Murder Imperfect has as its protagonist, heroine may be a little bit of an overstatement, Kat. Kat is like 36 years old, and she is a cheating louse for a husband. Let me state that. Her idea is that she's going to divorce him, and she's going to be a very alluring divorcee. She lives in Wellesley. And the problem is that because her husband is also a thief, if she divorces him, she's going to end up being a poor divorcee instead of an alluring, wealthy divorcee, so she can't do that. And moreover, also, he's stupid, and he's going to get caught, which means that she's going to be a really poor, non-alluring divorcee, and who, because she doesn't have clothes to put on her back anymore. So she sets out to murder him. As the title hints, things don't quite go well. Murder Imperfect. She lives just long enough for some blood to be drawn, and so as a result, she's going to get arrested, indicted for murder, and she's going to go on trial for it. Which means that Kat, my protagonist, gets to be a strong woman twice over. Once by dealing with the fact that she's got this loss for her husband. The second time is to try and at least get off from this murder charge of which she is quite manifestly guilty. She'll defend herself, but along the way she has both people who are with her and people who are against her. One of the women in this book is sort of her bête noire, and it is her husband's mistress, Susan Perkins Booth, whom Kat gives the name Susie Perky Boobs. And Susie has at her way of dealing with life. She's only 26, and she sees what it takes in order to go through maturity and such. And she's going to skip that long, boring part about working for a living and helping her husband and all this stuff. She's going to straight go marry for money, or else take the money and become wealthy immediately. That's her plan. And George was her means of doing that. And so Kat is going to be the mistress from hell who's going to dog Kat all the way through this book. Dog Kat. Well, anyway. But there's also a nemesis, a district attorney, who sees her arrest as a stepping stone toward his becoming attorney general. But she also has some friends, a husband and wife, a legal team, who have a propensity for taking on cases of very interesting people who also seem to be guilty. I hope that people are going to like Murder and Perfect. I hope that they read the story and that they find things about it that they found appealing. But what I got back was this almost incredible reaction about Kat. People loved Kat. Women thought Kat were resourceful. Men thought Kat were sexy. In fact, there was one guy who was convinced that she was modeling a real person and wanted me to introduce him to her. I don't want to go there. Well, Murder and Perfect actually also engendered one thing which is absolutely fascinating, that about a month after the book came out, I had a call from a psychologist, and the psychologist had read the book. I had never met this woman before, but she had done a psychological profile of Kat. 4 pages of single-spaced notes, and I met with her, and she told me all about Kat's neuroses and psychoses, and whether she was or was not repentant about having killed her husband. And I said, oh my gosh, I have created a believable character. That was one of the neatest things that's ever happened to me. And it gave me the fortitude to go off and write The Garden Club Gang. The Garden Club Gang have 4 protagonists in it. There are 4 women, between the youngest is 51, the oldest is 71. These are women who, in their own words, have spent their lives as helpmates. They've been wives and mothers. None of them have ever done anything particularly brave. But there are also 4 women who are each in a crisis. For the youngest, Paula, it's a medical crisis. There's a recurrence of a cancer that she thought that she'd beaten, and she's wondering, what have I done with my life? For Eleanor, the crisis is spiritual. She has a husband who has Alzheimer's, and he's slipping away, and she's realizing that the retirement that she wanted with him is never going to happen. For Alice, the oldest, the crisis is financial. She's slowly descending into poverty for the simple reason that she's outlived her money. And for Jean, the crisis is one of being angry over the fact that a husband whom she never loved is still controlling her beyond the grave. These women are each going to step well outside their comfort zone, and what they're going to do is they're going to rob a fair, which we think Topsfield Fair, since it just ended. And they concoct a plan. It's Paula's idea. Paula originally was going to do this as that thing that she wanted to do before she faces this surgery. But she realizes she can't do it alone, and so she goes to Eleanor, and Eleanor comprehends immediately what needs to be done. In fact, takes over the planning of it and realizes that they're going to need a 3rd person and then a 4th person in order to pull this off. And the amazing thing is that they do pull it off because they are smart women. And they pull it off in such a way that nobody gets hurt, there are no clues left behind, and they get the money. Problem is they got way too much money. Way too much money. Obviously they have stepped into something quite illegal, and some really bad people are going to want that money back from them. At this point in that made-for-TV movie, these women would either turn themselves into police, they would sit in a corner cowering, or else they would go to a man for help. Well, they don't. They're strong, they're resourceful. Now, they are going to have help from another woman, this one younger, who's going to be an unexpected ally. But they're going to figure out they're going to figure the resolution to this themselves. And in one of the scenes, which I'm most proud to ever to have written, there's going to come a point in time where exactly that scene that I'm talking about is being played out, except in this case, it's a thug who is beating up one of her friends. And in this case, the woman who's had the recurrence of cancer is going to pick up a baseball bat. And she's going to go in and she's going to start flailing away, even though she weighs 112 pounds. And when that thug turns on her, she isn't going to start crying or cowering or anything else. She's still going to keep fighting back. People tell me that is one of the scenes that keeps reverberating in their mind. The strength that she brings at this time when she is not afraid to fight back when somebody whom her friend, is threatened. The Accidental Spy, my third book, is one which is sort of a historical one. It's set in 1967. It's 1967, and Susan Delaney, who is age 27, is an airline stewardess for Pan American. And Susan is a great character. Now, she lives in a world that's very different. Maybe it's the world that you may remember, but it's a world that's so different from today. She graduated from college in 1961, and when she went to work, the world was divided into help wanted male and help wanted female. And the male's jobs were all the good ones, and the female jobs were secretaries and sales clerks, and that isn't what she wanted. She was smart, she was intelligent, so she went to work for an airline because that's the way she was going to be able to make her way in the world her own way. Today she'd probably be an executive for a corporation, but back then that was what available to her. She is also going to get involved into an espionage plot, and that's the heart of the book. And she jumps in feet first into it, even though she knows that the bullets that are flying around her are quite real. She's doing it for love of country because she's doing this for America. She's also a romantic, and she's looking for Mr. Right, and when a guy who looks just like the very young Paul Newman drops into our story, she falls hard. And she's decided he just may be, Mr. Right. All she's got to do is keep him alive and keep herself alive. She's exceptionally resourceful. She gets confronted in a museum by a pair of spies who want to essentially kidnap her. She gets away on her own, doesn't need help from anyone. And when there comes that life and death moment where she is going to have to use a gun that she has never used in her life and shoot at someone, she doesn't hesitate to do it. She's also flesh and blood heroine, though. When it is over with, yeah, there are going to be tears, but not while it's happening, and she's not afraid. She does what she has to do. There's a secondary character in The Accidental Spy. Her name is Sadie. And if you saw her on an airplane, you would think that she was a nice grandmotherly lady in her 60s or 70s who was sitting there knitting booties for her granddaughter. But she's an air marshal, and inside that little knitting bag of her is enough of an arsenal to start a small war. Sadie is going to take Susan Delaney under her wing and is going to show her the things she needs to know in order to be a spy for the short time that she is one. And Sadie has a backstory that is also one that people have come up and told me and say, great. She's a Holocaust survivor. She lost her daughter in Israel's war for independence. She lost her husband in the 1956 war. She does what she has to do, and she does it with determination. If you want to talk about strong, if you want to talk about someone who is fearless, that's Sadie. She's absolutely terrific. So I have 3 books out, and each one of them, to a greater or less extent, have involved humor in order to make their point. They're fast-paced, they're a lot of fun, they're very easy reading. I wanted to tackle something more like the classic whodunits, the Agatha Christie's and the Dennis Lehanes of the world. Maybe that's too much of an aspiration. And what I had as I read a lot of mysteries is that most mysteries, to me, don't work. And the reason that they don't work is that the female protagonists in them are, to my mind anyway, they're wrong. It's a little old lady who goes out and solves crimes. And in the real world, it's the police who solve crimes. And civilians are told, please stay out of this. All you're going to do is mess things up for us. Yet in mysteries, you end up with this, with the bumbling detective who has to be led around by the nose by an Agatha Raisin sort of character. And the plots of them get to be the point to be they strain credulity. The idea that somebody ate a poisoned quiche at a village fair, and that the clue that's going to solve it is being hidden under a pumpkin somewhere. Thank you. That's not a story that I want to write. In fact, I don't even want to read anymore. Mysteries are allowed to be escapist, but when I wanted to write a mystery like that, I wanted for it to be able to stay within the bounds of credulity. So in my mind, if there was going to be a crime-solving woman, she was going to have to work with a policeman, and that she was going to have to be quite believable. And what sort of woman would be able to do this? Turns out they're all around me. In the suburbs of Boston, you've got to have tens of thousands of women who have followed this sort of career arc. They're college educated, they went to work in the world for a period of time, they married, they had children, and then when the children were starting to get grown, either they went back into the workforce, or else they threw themselves into things like community activities and volunteering and club work. They're intelligent. I mean, that college degree they earned, it wasn't given to them, and they're inquisitive. So why not let them be the person who is going to solve that crime and have credible kind of crimes to solve? So I created my character. Let me tell you a little bit about her. Her name is Liz Phillips. She's 55. She has a BS and an MS in physics from MIT. She came of age when, 55 years of track back, she got her degree at a time when women still were not accepted into the sciences. She could have had all the degrees in the world, and if you were in a research laboratory, you were simply going to be a distraction to the real scientist. So instead what she became was a lab equipment salesperson. And so for a couple of years she was out there calling the same labs that would never have hired her, selling them the equipment that they were going to use. Eventually she married, she found the right guy. She had a daughter. The daughter is now in her mid-20s and living in Seattle. She has a husband. They eventually moved to a town called Hardington, a fictional suburb of Boston. And that is where she lives today. Her husband has her own management consulting business. She elected not to go back to work after her daughter was grown. Instead, she's thrown herself into the volunteer world. She's an avid gardener, so she's president of the Hardington Garden Club. As president, she knows both the townies, the people who live in the town for generations, as well as the new money people who are putting up, the 4,000 square foot starter castles out on the farm fields. This is who she is. Again, smart, intelligent, resourceful, and I need to have a resume that also is going to go on the other side of her. And the other thing you need to know about her is that this is a woman who's very lonely. That management consulting business her husband has, he gets on a plane on Monday morning, and if she's lucky, he flies back Friday night. And if she's not lucky because he's out there rescuing companies, he may not be back for weeks on end. And he takes on assignments that last for months, and for a couple of weeks they get to go away somewhere really nice when the assignment's done, but then it's the next assignment, the next flight's being boarded on Monday morning. Her daughter, who's 26 and married, what used to be long chatty phone calls have unfortunately now become emails. And well, her daughter has her own life. Her daughter is growing up. And her daughter is thinking about starting her own family. And mother and daughter get along fine, but they're 3,000 miles apart. And sometimes those emails contain little tiny bombshells, like the fact that her daughter is thinking about going to Cabo St. Lucas with her husband for Thanksgiving. They've always had Thanksgiving together. So this is a lonely woman. How am I going to involve Liz into a murder? The way that I decided I was going to do it is simply that Liz finds the body. Another member of the Hardington Garden Club does not show up for a meeting one day. Liz goes to her home, finds the woman dead at the bottom of her stairs. It looks like an accident. There's all the makings of breakfast going on out there, And the dog is running around, so her friend Sally probably just tripped over the dog, fell down the stairs, and unfortunately, she's dead. Liz calls the police, and as the police are en route, Liz looks around the kitchen, the dining room, and realizes that it's not right. There's a coffee pile on. This woman never drank coffee. There's a sugar bowl on. This woman hated sugar, ranted against sugar. Why are these things out? Whoever set up this breakfast scene was not her friend. Somebody else has been in that house. The police arrive, and now I introduce my second character. My second character in this is Detective John Flynn. We're going to find out a lot about Detective Flynn as the stories go on. He's a guy who keeps it all bottled up inside of him. Until a couple of months ago, he was one of the top detectives with the Boston Police Department, one of their top people for solving homicides. He's retired. He's also in his mid-50s, and as you know, in Boston, you can, with 30 years, you can get 2/3 pay. And a lot of what of them do, they come out to the small towns, they take a job, as the town's detective, and it's a great thing to do. Doesn't cost the town very much, but that's a different story. He takes a look at the scene. He's only been on the job for a month, and he's saying, there ain't no way there's a murder here. Come on, this is a town that hasn't had a murder in 15 years. And so he dismisses what Liz has to say because he brings a lot of prejudices to the job, and one of them is that wealthy suburban women have a very overactive imagination. But he's also a smart policeman, and as he looks around the scene, both looking at the physical evidence, he sees things that to him also don't make sense. And so there's this wraparound that's going to happen. Detective Flynn is going to call on Liz Phillips and say, tell me what you think happened. And thus is born a partnership. And in this partnership, there is no bumbling policeman being led around by the nose. It's two smart people working together. One of them solving a crime by intuition and by knowing the town, the other one by looking at the physical evidence. And so it's going to take both of them working very hard together, each one both independently and together. Liz is even going to call in those degrees that she has in physics in order to uncover certain clues. But in the end, they're going to solve that crime. Well, A Murder in the Garden Club came out. I haven't been holding up the books, but if you're back there, besides, it's a distraction. The book came out, and the reaction to it was absolutely terrific. And everybody said, what are you going to write next? I want to read more about these. I want to read more about Liz Phillips. So I was confronted with the problem of how do you find another story? How do you have another murder in the same little town of 10,000 people 2 months after the first one takes place? And it turns out that there was a plot that had been staring me in the face all the time. I live in a town called Medfield. And first of all, whenever I say I live in Medfield, everybody says, oh yeah, my niece went to Tufts. Well, this is not Meffa. This is Medfield. And it's about 40 miles that way. So it's due south of Wellesley. And 7 years ago, the TV reality show Extreme Makeover Home Edition came to Medfield, and in 1 week, they built a home for a needy family. It was everything, no one talked about anything else going on in this town for weeks on end. In fact, they still talk about it today, for the Johnson family. It was a great project. It involved over 500 volunteers, and the crew set up tents and everything on an old state hospital grounds where they assembled modules, shipped the modules down the road down to where the house was being built, and literally from the time the bulldozers came to excavate the old foundation to the time when the family moved into the home with Kurt Schilling taking them through the house was 1 week. Boy, is this a well-orchestrated thing. And I decided that would make a great background for a story. Except, of course, in my story, somebody's got to get killed. And so on the first day of construction, the body of a town selectman is found at the site. Okay? How am I going to involve Liz? Well, Liz is one of those things where she's in the wrong place at the wrong time. She has gotten the bill of materials for the plantings, the foundation plants that are going into this house, and she sees that they're completely messed up. So she's going in to yell and scream at people and saying, these plants are all going to die over the winter. This is New England. England and you're from California, you don't know anything about this. And so while this blank-faced little production assistant is listening to her and saying, how do I get these people in there? Where's the volunteer coordinator who's supposed to be taken care of? When his body is found, when the town selectman is found, he was the guy who was the volunteer coordinator for this project. And because Liz has shown that she knows something and she seems to be resourceful, she gets pressed into service to take over the job. But she doesn't think she's involved in solving the murder. In fact, she's got her own secondary mystery that she's trying to solve as the days go by. Yeah, Detective Flynn is asking about her, but in the meantime, though, she's seeing things going on both in the volunteers and the cast and crew of the show that says, you know, maybe something isn't right here. And so the mystery that she's trying to solve and the mystery that Detective Flynn is trying to solve are going to end up merging and becoming the same one. So, credible, a good way of making these things work. There are also some other interesting women in this one as well. For example, there is a person who was a minor character, Felicity Snipes, who was in the first book. She's a professional athlete's wife. And when you think professional athlete's wife, you say, oh yeah, okay, right, ditzy, blonde, you know, like that. Not this lady. She is smart. In fact, she's got her degrees in child psychology. How's that for a comeuppance? And she says, yeah, it's really, child psychology is very useful in dealing with athletes, believe me. There's a great deal of overlap. But she understands that her real job is that her husband's arm is only going to last X number of years. And that when his career is over, her job is to make certain that she's still able to, that he is still able to put food on the table. So she manages career as well as her own psychology consulting practice. I also introduced another character into it, who in some ways is another Liz Phillips. She's a realtor, and she also has a husband who is away with great frequency, except that she's dealing with her life a very different way, and it's one that causes Liz to have a great deal of introspection about her own life. Once again, the crime is going to end up getting solved. Liz is going to be instrumental in solving it, along with Felicity Snipes, as it turns out. And the question I've been asked now is, what about a third one? Well, I've got some ideas, but please don't press me. This book has only been out for a month. So, strong, independent women they're fun to write about. It's fun to be writing about real people, and not about poisoned quiches and village fairs. It's good to be able to write about plausible crimes that could really be taking place, and to have people whom you and I could well know being the people who are out there solving them. In fact, I hope if you read the books, you may go ahead and get interested in looking at the police blotter and saying, maybe I might be able to help with something like that. That's what I wanted to tell you this morning. It's been terrific. 5 so far. I hope there are a couple more on the way. In fact, I've got the first draft done, as my wife will tell you. I keep beating my hands against the wall. And that's it. Who's got any questions? Who wants to know anything about anything in the world? Yes, sir.
You mentioned Kurt Schilling and other people, real people.
Yes.
Did you have any? Is there any special requirement when you're writing a story about a fiction about involved in living people?
For living people, first of all, you put a statement in the front of the book that if there is any resemblance between any person living or dead, they're better off dead. No, I'm sorry, it's purely coincidental. But there's also a fair use sort of thing. Instead of Kurt Schilling, the professional athlete who actually does live in Medfield, Kurt does live in Medfield, I give him the name again. He's Tom. He's Tom Snipes, and he is the starting quarterback for the New England Patriots. And in fact, Tom Brady used to live in Medfield also. If anybody knows Kurt Schilling, that Shonda Schilling is really the brains in the family. But by changing the names, I'm allowed to do anything I want to with them. Instead of Extreme Makeover Home Edition, I call the program Ultimate House Makeover. And the cast of characters, instead of Ty Pennington, I call the guy Whit Dakota. But there's a great deal of similarity between the two people. Believe me, as I was researching the book, I was still working when Extreme Makeover Home Edition came to town, but I spoke with literally dozens of people who worked on the project trying to get the details of it right. And the stories I heard about the producers, the assistant producers, and Ty Pennington, that would fill its own book all on its own. So it's fair use.
If you had said anything negative about the principal character, who was obviously Fred Schilling, would that have been a problem? And if he had been a scoundrel in the book?
Okay. No, once
You have
again,
limitations, in other words.
once again, it's fair use. You were a public person, and I've changed your name, and there are enough details to where it's fairly cloudy out there. It's not something that I have ever, again, you're protected when you do that. Just don't say that Tom Menino murdered XYZ, in December 2008, because that one you're not going to get away with.
But as your character, did you understand that character was clearly going to be identified as Fred Schilling and Ty Pennington and so forth? Was it quite clear to everyone?
No, I'm not trying to write a roman à clef. I'm simply, wow. Okay, let me back up a step, because that's a fascinating question. It's something it is in my mind. When I created the town of Hardington is as much a character in these books as any of the people in them. And what I've done is I've stitched together bits and pieces, physical landmarks and such, from at least a dozen different communities, so that while you can point to these 5 things and say, oh yeah, that's exactly like Winchester, you can point to these other 12 things and say, oh, Winchester doesn't have that. And so there is no Hardington. You can have, again, it is fictional. So that's the first part of it. The second thing is that is that the starting quarterback for the New England Patriots, does not live in Medfield. He lives in Weston.
Quincy.
And sorry.
Quincy.
Okay, thank you. And his wife is not a child psychologist. So I'm pretty well protected on that score. But I'm not trying for it to be, to be able to simply rename characters. Instead, I'm trying to create a sort of an alternate universe which has things to where you can take bits and pieces and put it in. But no, not exactly the same, because again, this isn't an expose. This is simply fiction to where it sounds, hey, this sounds like fun. Yes?
Do you spend more time on your research, and you just say how you talk to everybody, or more time on your writing, or just once you get the research of characters, they kind of have a life of their own, and they do things that you don't even expect?
Yes. Okay. You asked a couple of questions there, and I will try and answer them.
Yeah.
First, there are books that I've been able simply to make up out of thin air. Murder and Perfect is more or less, it all started with going to a charity dinner and meeting someone who became Kat. Actually never meeting her, just simply observing her. But the rest of the story is all made up. And there's a lot of financial stuff in it, but I already knew that. Garden Club Gang, my wife went off and did a design at the Topsfield Fair a couple of years ago, and I'm out there at 7 o'clock in the morning, trying to wait time in order to take her home, and standing outside the Flowers building, I can see the administration building right across the way, and there's the main gate to the fair. And I say, wouldn't it be fascinating if somebody, armored truck pulls in and somebody robs it? So, but again, I already knew the stuff to go into it. Now, for The Accidental Spy, I immersed myself into a world that I had frankly forgotten a great deal about. And the part of it that I remembered was wrong. So in order to get the details right about dozens of things in that, I spent months doing research. And for A Murder in the Garden Club and the Garden Club and for Murder for a Worthy Cause, both of those are ones where I'm observing things around me. But when it came time to write about how a home can get built in a week, I mean, I visited a modular home factory in New York in order to understand how that process works, so that when I wrote about it in the book, it would all sound accurate, because I wanted it to be accurate. Now, characters, once you get them going, if you do it right, they start speaking to you. And they start living with you, and they start looking over your shoulder and telling you what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong. And they will veer off into unexpected corners just because they are good characters. And I love it when that happens. It takes me probably 3 months, 4 months to do a first draft of a book. But then after that, it can take a year to go back and rewrite it and keep looking at each different area of the book, making it better, making it crisper, tightening it up, finding out additional facts that I may not have known about, working other things in the story, the subplots and such. And every once in a while, well, I think that in any story you need to write yourself into a corner at some point and not have a solution for how the thing's going to turn out. And so I've done that with my books also, and where you will sit for 3 weeks, my wife will tell you I get really cranky while I'm waiting for the solution to come into my mind. But eventually it does, and you go on, and next thing you know, you got a book.
Now, did you always have an active imagination?
According to my mother, I had an extremely active imagination, and I was punished for it.
And then you were in IT, so you were used to doing creative solutions.
I was,
If you're in IT, you're usually used to doing creative solutions.
well, I worked, okay, let's step aside here for just a moment. I worked in high technology for all my career, at least once it was called high technology when we moved in it. I worked on the financial side of it more than anything else, but believe me, there's a great deal of creativity in finance. Sometimes more creativity than there ought to be. But I was working, yes, I was required to be creative, but for all the writing that I did when I was out there in the corporate world, nobody ever came up to me and said, Neal, I just finished reading the prospectus. I couldn't put down the risk factors. That 10K, that 10K,
About a murder in the financial environment, which you know so much about. I mean, you could have very interesting things to say.
As a matter of fact, I have a website called thehardingtonpress.com, and in there you will find the opening chapters for everything that I've ever written. And one of them is set during the sale of a high technology company, when the financial people are coming in and you're doing the final due diligence before the sale. And I have an investment banker as my heroine for this. Another strong, independent woman. And she sees things going on in the process of closing that bother her. And the next thing you know, somebody tries to kill her. So yeah, that's I could never find a publisher who was interested in that story, but it's one that I think is a great one to tell. So yeah, been there and would like to do it again. Yes?
What is the point that you decided to give up your job and start writing full time? Did you always write as a hobby?
The specific point that happened was I have worked for 7 companies over the course of my career. I mean, it's not something where I started with General Electric and I retired from General Electric. In the world of technology, you don't really have the option. Sometimes companies get sold out from underneath you. Sometimes they go bankrupt. I went to work for I've lived in Boston off and on since 1980. And in 1999, I was offered a job with a struggling technology company and came in as the senior vice president for corporate development. And my job was basically to rescue the company. It was to raise money so that they could get back on their feet. They did. And then the huge semiconductor capital equipment recession, I'm boring you to tears at this point, okay, hit in 2002, and the company just slammed itself right into a wall. The company declared bankruptcy. And my job at that point became working with the trustees for the company, was to sell the company to the highest bidder. It took 18 months, and during those 18 months, I worked how many hours a day, how many days a week? Yeah.
20.
And at the end of the time, I had an offer to go to work for the acquiring company. I had an offer to go to work for the investment banker, and I was tired. I was really, really tired, and I had sufficient financial security to where I didn't have to go back to work the next day, and I didn't, because I really, really wanted to write. Now, had I been writing all those years? Yeah, I actually sat there and I cranked out when I was 40 years old. I wrote that cathartic, horrible, novel, which is when you talk about just changing the names, all about me as a whiny teenager, and it resides somewhere, wrapped inside a metal box with concrete weights on it, somewhere where nobody will ever see it again, because it's awful. And in the meantime, I wrote, started a blog when blogs started being done, and the blogs are sort of my finger exercises. Sort of the same way you just sit down as that piano and do finger stretching exercises, etudes. A blog is an etude. Write 900 crisp words on a subject, in this case gardening, and it gets you started to where you can now go in and write the story that you want to write. So, yeah, I had, in fact, if you go back into the great late Pleistocene era, I actually had a degree in journalism once upon a time. But writing was something I wanted to do, and once I got started, I don't want to give that up for anything. So you first, yes.
You must have developed a sense of being a great observer of the world. You must look at so many details as you're just living your ordinary life. Are you a note taker?
My wife would disagree with you strenuously.
Oh.
She would say that I don't remember anything, that I don't see anything, and that I never take notes.
Close that theory.
But I think that we're all, how do I put this? I talk about it as my metaphysical gym bag. I carry around with me, wherever I go, mine is Kelly Green, and I carry it with my left hand, and every time I see something that is really interesting, if I overhear something, in a supermarket or a post office or in here today, I make a note of it mentally and I put it into that gym bag. And when it comes time to write about what it is I'm going to write, I empty that gym bag out on the table and I start writing. Now, as a result of that, my wife has been ostracized from her garden club because I write about things going on in there which embarrassed her mightily, even though I did change the name. When I wrote the Garden Club Gang, I had a couple of specific people in mind whom I wrote about, one of whom, when I make a point of showing people manuscripts when I to get their take on it. And there was a memorable event when a woman called me and said she had read the manuscript, and I go into her kitchen, and she's sitting at the kitchen table, she has a manuscript in front of her, she invites me to take a chair, and she shoves the manuscript across the table as hard as she can. She says, "I would never do anything like that." So, yeah, I'm an observer. Some of my books contain dialogue taken verbatim from places that I have, in Murder Imperfect, when Kat gets arrested, she's photographed for her booking, and about a year before that, I had been in my town's post office, and in front of me there were two women standing in line, and they were turning in their passport applications, and they're reading one another's passport applications, and the one turns to the other and says, "No way, you're 5'9". First woman turns back and says, "I am in my heels." can do that? Yeah, it's part of who I am. Well, men don't know anything about shoes. Okay, let's put that as a let's agree on that point. But I heard that comment, and oh my gosh, isn't that wonderful? So when Kat gets arrested, and they put her up in front of the screen, they've got the bar right there, and it's 5'6". And the one thing she is mad about more than anything else in that arrest is the fact that the world now knows that she's only 5'6" instead of 5'9", which is what she believes herself to be. So yeah, I guess I am an observer, despite evidence to the contrary. You had a question? You forgot your question. Okay.
Well, and you see, just gave you the focus is always on women.
Mm-hmm.
Now we have Colombo and Poirot, but I'd be interested in your comments on them, that style. But do you ever have anything to do with a man who was clever and solves crimes?
Well, again, John Flynn is extremely intelligent. He's smart, but he's new in town, and he is he's a complicated character, and he needs. I wanted to have the two of them working as a pair. My problem, I don't know how to say this. Women are a whole lot more interesting than men are. Okay, they do things and they react in ways. And if it were all if the world were nothing but men, fiction would die. All right, let's be careful about that. So I think Peter Falk inherited the role of Columbo so perfectly well that he was that he will live through eternity, and he's a great guy. Hercule Poirot, I never got into him. He's maybe it's because he's Belgian or something. To me, the male sleuths out there tend to be far too physical in the way that they solve. Their first thing is, solve it with your fist. I'm much more interested in my sleuth solving it with her mind. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. I exhausted my audience today. Thank you. I'm understanding that the books over there, is there a rebate back to the Jenks Center on their sale? There's not. Okay, fine.
But they don't charge us that,
Okay, tax-free.
so it's tax-free. The books
So-
are $14?
All the books are $14, yes.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for having me this morning.